When someone speaks, it is not merely words that are being exchanged. It is energy, intent, and most importantly, a reflection of who they are. You must learn to listen not only to what is being said, but to what is behind the words. Because what a man says in passing can often carry the entire truth of his being. Relationships are sacred, not because two people come together, but because of the space they create between them. And that space must be a sanctuary, not a battlefield. If a man uses certain words, certain patterns of speech that are rooted in dominance, disrespect, or detachment, you must not ignore them. Do not confuse habit with affection. Do not confuse charisma with character. Words, my dear, are the beginning of everything. Before any action, there is a thought. And before that thought becomes manifest, it comes as a whisper, a sentence, a statement. You must be alert. So when a man says any of these 5 things to you, not once but as a habit, it is not your job to fix him. It is your responsibility to protect yourself. Walk away, not in anger, not in hate, but with clarity, because your peace is not up for negotiation. What a person says is a mirror of their consciousness. Words are not merely tools for communication. They are the vibrations of our inner state. When a man speaks, listen not just with your ears, but with your awareness. Look past the surface of his language and feel the intention behind it. A man who speaks with consistent negativity, sarcasm, or hidden jabs is unknowingly revealing the noise that exists within him. He might say, "I was just joking," or laugh off a harsh comment, but that is only a veil. The truth always leaks through language. There is a kind of speech that builds, that nurtures, that holds you like gentle hands, even in disagreement. And there is another kind that cuts subtly, that leaves you feeling small, confused, or unseen. When someone's words make you question your worth, when they consistently place themselves at the center of every sentence and leave no room for your voice, it is not just an accident of personality, it is a window into their worldview. We live in a culture that often trains us to dismiss hurtful words, to forgive easily, and to hope for change. But hope is not a strategy, and growth is not promised. If someone constantly speaks in a way that belittles, controls, or ignores you, those words are not random. They are patterns, and patterns are habits, deeply rooted in how a person thinks and feels, not just about you, but about themselves and the world. To ignore this is to build a house on sand, because sooner or later, the storm will come, and you'll find that those words you brushed aside were the warning bells you chose not to hear. Words are energy, they are arrows, they are seeds, and what a man says, again and again, will one day become the garden you live in. Make sure the soil is not poisoned. Make sure the voice beside you is not slowly replacing your not all harm arrives with noise. There is a form of violence that comes wrapped in softness, that doesn't shout or slam doors, but instead, it creeps in through words. Quiet, subtle, and deceptively gentle. This kind of violence is not visible to the eye, yet it leaves deep marks on the soul. It comes in phrases that seem innocent on the surface. "You're just too much." "Why can't you take a joke?" Or, "You're overthinking again." Spoken with a casual tone, they land like feathers but bruise like stones. What makes this dangerous is that it doesn't look like abuse. There's no scene, no chaos. Instead, it creates confusion. You begin to question yourself. Was that really unkind? Am I being too sensitive? Maybe I should learn to take things lightly. And just like that, the poison enters your mind. Not through force, but through manipulation. This is how subtle violence works. It turns you against yourself, while the one delivering it remains untouched, even charming in the eyes of others. This kind of speech drains your spirit over time. It chips away at your sense of worth, one joke at a time, one dismissive comment at a time. You start to anticipate these words, to shrink before they come. And the worst part is, it often comes from those who claim to love you. But love, in its truest form, never seeks to diminish. It seeks to uplift. So when a man repeatedly chooses sarcasm instead of sincerity, irony instead of intimacy, he is not being clever, he is avoiding vulnerability. And in doing so, he is choosing control over connection. We live in a world that rewards wit, that mistakes sharpness for intelligence. But there is nothing wise about words that harm. There is no strength in humor that humiliates. True strength lies in the ability to speak with kindness even in conflict, to disagree without degradation, to express disappointment without dismantling the other person's self-esteem. The deeper issue is that many have grown up hearing these kinds of words and have come to accept them as normal. But normal is not always natural, and it is certainly not always nurturing. You must unlearn the language of hurt, even if it was spoken by those who raised you. Because if you do not, you will spend your life thinking that love always feels like fear, that closeness must come with criticism, and that affection comes laced with cruelty. Violence in speech is not always obvious, but it is always impactful. Words are like seedlings, what is planted repeatedly will grow. If a man sows seeds of mockery, control, or condescension, the garden you grow together will bear the bitter fruit of resentment. You deserve a space where your voice is not only heard but respected, where silence isn't safer than speaking up. Anything less is a betrayal to your soul. You cannot heal someone who has no desire to change. You cannot guide a person who sees no need for reflection. And you certainly cannot carry someone who refuses to walk. When a man consistently uses hurtful words, dismissive tones, or demeaning language, yet shows no sign of awareness or remorse, it is not your responsibility to fix him. Many people enter relationships hoping that love will transform the other person. They believe that patience will soften cruelty, or that understanding will melt arrogance. But this is a dangerous illusion. Healing is an inner journey. It begins only when a person recognizes their own wounds and takes responsibility for their behavior. No matter how much empathy you offer, no matter how deeply you love, you cannot make someone grow who is rooted in denial. There is a difference between supporting someone and sacrificing yourself. The moment you begin to abandon your boundaries to accommodate someone else's refusal to evolve, you're not helping them, you're enabling their dysfunction. It is noble to be compassionate, but compassion without discernment becomes self-betrayal. Many women stay in relationships far too long, convinced that if they just love him harder, if they are more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, he will eventually change. But let us be clear, growth is not a reward you earn by suffering. If he truly wanted to change, he would not wait for your break to begin his breakthrough. The burden of healing a man who is unwilling to confront his own shadows is a weight that will slowly crush your spirit. You will find yourself explaining basic respect, begging for emotional safety, and tiptoeing around his moods like a child around a sleeping volcano. And all the while you'll call it love. But love that costs you your peace, your dignity, and your sense of self is not love. It is a trap disguised as loyalty. Many women are conditioned to become nurturers, to fix and mend. But the truth is, not everyone is your responsibility, especially someone who chooses to use their words as weapons and expects you to stay silent in the name of love. You are not a therapist, nor are you his savior. A relationship is not a rehabilitation center. It is a union of two whole beings committed to growth. Not a place where one person bleeds while the other watches indifferently. Even the most beautiful soul can be drained by a toxic connection. And toxicity often hides behind charm, behind charisma, behind moments of affection that are just enough to keep you hooked, but never enough to build a real foundation. He might say, "I didn't mean it," or "You're overacting," again and again, but if the hurt keeps repeating, those apologies are empty. Words without change are manipulation. So, understand this deeply: the desire to heal someone cannot come at the cost of harming yourself. If you find yourself explaining basic decency, begging to be heard, or shrinking just to keep the peace, It is not a sign of strength. It is a signal that something is deeply misaligned. Your compassion is a gift, but it must be reserved for those who value it. Otherwise, it becomes fuel for your own slow disappearance. Before any major act of betrayal, neglect, or cruelty, there are always early signs. They don't arrive in storms or grand displays. They arrive quietly, subtly, through words. Language is the first stage of energy being put into action. When a man speaks, his words are not random sounds. They are the beginning of what he will eventually live out. What he says in irritation today may be what he does in anger tomorrow. The way he speaks to you in moments of tension, in ordinary conversations, in passing remarks, that's where the truth of his character lies. We often overlook this because we are taught to focus on behavior, to wait for the real problem to show itself. But the real problem is often already visible in how he speaks to you when he's tired, when he's slightly annoyed, or when he's trying to exert control without raising his voice. The comment he makes about your intelligence, masked as a joke. The way he cuts you off mid-sentence, not once but habitually. The sarcastic tone when you express a boundary. These are not coincidences. These are rehearsals for future disrespect. Energy always precedes action. You must understand that. There is no violent hand that wasn't first guided by a violent thought. And that thought is almost always first spoken in a smaller, quieter form. The man who eventually breaks your trust will have first broken your spirit with words you dismissed. The man who grows cold and distant will have first hinted at it through indifferent, careless comments. It is not paranoia to pay attention to speech. It is wisdom. Speech carries frequency. Loving people speak in a way that creates ease in your body. Their words bring peace, even when the subject is difficult. But someone who constantly makes you second guess, who uses language like a tool to dominate, confuse, silence, that person is revealing their true essence, even if they smile while doing it. Too often, people are caught off guard when a relationship turns toxic, abusive, or deeply painful. They say, "I never saw it coming." But if you trace it back carefully, you'll realize the signs were there in the beginning, hidden in the tone of a joke, the edge of sarcasm, the lack of interest in your feelings, or the cold dismissal of your needs. The tragedy is not that these signs don't appear, it's that we are trained to ignore them. There is a deep wisdom in learning to observe how a man speaks, not just to you, but about others. How does he speak about people he disagrees with? How does he speak when he's losing control? How does he speak when no one is watching? These are the clearest signals of who he is becoming. And what he is becoming is what you will eventually experience. Not just through words, but through choices, behavior, and consequences. Words are blueprints. A man builds the structure of your relationship through the language he chooses. If those words are full of anger, sarcasm, or disregard, the structure will not stand. You will try to make a home out of a house built on fear and emotional instability. And it will collapse, not suddenly, but gradually, through years of being spoken to in ways that were never worthy of your heart in the first place. So do not underestimate speech. It is not just sound, it is signal. And when that signal is consistently laced with control, contempt, or confusion, you must listen. Not just with your ears, but with your entire being. Because whatever is said repeatedly is not just what he thinks, it is what he is becoming. And eventually, it will become your daily reality. Every relationship is a space, not a physical one, but an energetic, emotional, and spiritual space where two people meet. Not to possess, not to dominate, but to co-create something sacred. When you invite someone into your emotional world, you are not just offering companionship, you are offering access to your innermost being. That access should come with respect, mindfulness, and gentleness. But when someone enters that space with emotional dirt on their feet, anger, arrogance, sarcasm, emotional neglect, they are not participating in sacred connection, they are contaminating it. A relationship should be a place where you feel safe to be soft, safe to speak, safe to feel without judgment. It is not meant to be a battlefield where you constantly guard your emotions, filter your words, or tiptoe around someone else's ego. If you find yourself shrinking just to keep the peace, if your joy starts to feel like a burden to someone else, or if your silence becomes more comfortable than your truth, then something sacred is being violated. The problem is, we have normalized dysfunction. Many people are living in emotional war zones and calling it love. They confuse choice with passion, manipulation with devotion, control with protection. When a man begins to speak in ways that are dismissive, mocking, or emotionally cold, he is not just having a bad day. He is disrupting the very foundation of the emotional space you both share. And once that space becomes polluted, everything within it begins to suffer. Your confidence, your clarity, your sense of self. There is an invisible thread between how someone speaks to you and how you begin to speak to yourself. If a man uses language that constantly invalidates your feelings, ridicules your goals, or treats your pain as an inconvenience, you will eventually internalize that tone. You may find yourself questioning your emotions, doubting your dreams, or apologizing for simply existing with your full emotional truth. That is the cost of allowing someone to dishonor the sacred space of a relationship. A truly conscious man will treat the relationship space like a sanctuary. He will not raise his voice to prove his power. He will not use silence as a weapon. He will not mock your vulnerabilities or make you feel small for expressing your needs. Because he knows that the words spoken within this space have the power to either build a garden or burn the foundation. He will walk into that space with reverence, not entitlement, and you too must protect that space with the same devotion, not with anger, not with fear, but with clear boundaries. You must learn to recognize when a man is not capable of honoring what is sacred. You must learn to tell the difference between a partner and a trespasser. One comes with intention. The other comes with intrusion. If someone keeps speaking in ways that violate your peace, minimize your voice, or reduce your worth, then it is not your job to continue making excuses for them. It is your responsibility to guard the sanctuary of your life. In truth, love is not found in grand gestures or poetic words. It is found in the small, everyday moments of respect, in the way someone listens, in the way they respond when you are vulnerable, in the language they use when you are hurt or afraid. These moments either strengthen the sacredness between you or slowly destroy it. So when a man speaks, pay attention, not just to what he says, but to how it makes you feel in the deepest, quietest corners of your soul, because in that feeling, the truth lies. When a man begins to tell you what you can and cannot do, who you can and cannot speak to, where you can and cannot go, it may not sound alarming at first. In fact, he may frame it in a tone of concern. I'm just trying to protect you. I don't trust them, not you. Or, I know what's best for you. But beneath that softness, there's a deeper truth. This is not love speaking. This is control dressed as care. And when control enters a relationship, freedom quietly begins to exit. Control rarely comes suddenly. It is not always loud or aggressive. Often, it's subtle and progressive. It starts with suggestions that sound reasonable. Then those suggestions become expectations. And those expectations, if left unchecked, turn into demands. Before you realize it, you're asking permission to live your own life, to make your own choices, to speak your own mind. You may even begin to mistake that control for affection. But control is never about love, it's about power. And love in its purest form has no hunger for power. A man who truly respects you will never need to limit you. He will not feel threatened by your independence or insecure about your relationships. He will celebrate your voice, your decisions, your individuality. Because he understands that closeness does not mean ownership. True intimacy is not about possessing the other. It's about honoring their sovereignty while choosing to walk beside them freely. But a man who uses control-based language, "You don't need to wear that. I don't like you talking to her. Why do you always go out without me?" is not building trust. He's slowly rewriting the rules of your life with himself as the central authority. This kind of dynamic is not only emotionally suffocating, it's deeply dangerous to your identity. Because soon, you begin to question yourself. You hesitate to make choices, you shrink your social circle, you suppress your desires. You trade your autonomy for peace, but it's a false peace. One that demands your silence in return for temporary harmony. And often, this type of control hides behind charm. He may still bring you flowers, speak kindly in public, post affectionate messages online, but behind closed doors, his language tightens around your freedom, like a rope you didn't notice until you could no longer move. Control doesn't always look like rage. It can look like sweet concern. But if that concern restricts your choices, it is not sweetness. It is manipulation in disguise. The most tragic part is that many women begin to internalize this control as normal. They start believing that sacrificing freedom is part of commitment, that a man's jealousy is a sign of love. That compromise means giving up parts of yourself to make the other feel secure. But that is not compromise. It's slow erasure. You were not created to be molded into someone else's comfort zone. You are not a canvas for his insecurities. You are a complete, vibrant being whose decisions, friendships, and expressions are yours to own. Control always begins in words. It always starts with statements. Watch for the language that sounds like love, but feels like a cage. Listen for the moments when his words aim to isolate you from others, to weaken your connection with yourself, to place his voice above yours. Because today's "don't talk to them" becomes tomorrow's "don't think for yourself." It escalates. Not always fast, but always silently. Love does not require restriction to feel safe. Trust does not require surveillance to be real. And a man who truly values you will never try to shrink your world to fit inside his comfort. Instead, he will support your growth, your expansion, your freedom. Because he knows that a woman who feels free beside him is not a threat, she's a blessing. When a man consistently tells you that you're too sensitive or that you're overreacting, he is not just dismissing your feelings. He is training you to distrust your own emotional compass. This is not a simple disagreement in perception. It is the quiet construction of a relationship dynamic where only one person's emotions are valid, and the others are labeled as exaggerated, irrational, or inconvenient. Over time, this behavior becomes a slow emotional erosion. It teaches you to question your pain, to suppress your truth, and to apologize for simply feeling. At first, it may appear harmless. Maybe you cry over something that genuinely hurt, and he says, "You're too emotional." You bring up a boundary, and he replies, "You're being dramatic." You express disappointment, and he responds with, "You always make things bigger than they are." It happens again and again. Not always with anger. Sometimes with a laugh, sometimes with silence, but always with the same message: your emotions are a problem. This type of response doesn't just hurt, it confuses. Because now, instead of standing confidently in your emotional truth, you start to hesitate. Was I really being too sensitive? Did I just make that up in my head? Should I just let it go? You begin to shrink yourself emotionally to avoid being told you're too much. You learn to bottle things up. You begin to believe that peace in the relationship depends on your ability to mute your inner world. This is emotional gaslighting at its most subtle and most common. It often goes unnoticed because it doesn't always come with shouting or threats. But its impact is just as destructive. It creates a dynamic where one person becomes emotionally dominant, and the other is relegated to emotional invisibility. And the more you're told you're too sensitive, the more desensitized you become to disrespect, to unkindness, and even to abuse. A healthy relationship does not require you to dull your feelings. It welcomes them. A man who genuinely values your heart will not fear its depth. He will want to understand what you feel, even if he doesn't always agree. He will not mock your tears or call your truth inconvenient. He will hold space for it, because he understands that love is not about having power over someone's emotions. It's about offering a safe place for those emotions to exist. When someone keeps telling you that you're overreacting, they are not trying to understand you. They are trying to silence you. And this is often done to avoid accountability. Because if your feelings are always labeled as irrational, then they never have to take responsibility for causing them. This creates a shield around their behavior while leaving you emotionally isolated and deeply uncertain about your own experiences. The long-term effect is devastating. You may find yourself years into a relationship where you no longer recognize your own emotional needs. You may struggle to advocate for yourself. Even in other areas of life, you may become so used to minimizing your feelings that you stop feeling altogether, or worse, believe you no longer deserve to feel. So, it is important to understand your emotions are not a weakness. They are signals. They are messengers. They are evidence of your inner intelligence. When someone mocks, minimizes, or rejects those messages, they are not being honest. They are being emotionally controlling. And no matter how charming, how apologetic, or how seemingly loving they may be in other moments, this behavior is a red flag that must not be ignored. You deserve to be heard, not managed. You deserve to be felt, not filtered. And you deserve to be in a relationship where your emotions are not only safe but sacred. Because love, real love, does not ask you to silence your truth in exchange for temporary harmony. It invites you to bring your whole heart, with all its depth, all its softness, and all its strength, and promises to meet you there with respect. When a man repeatedly blames you for every problem, every misunderstanding, every flaw in the relationship, you are not in a partnership. You are in a setup designed to protect his ego at the cost of your sanity. Blame, when used constantly, is not a way of resolving issues. It is a weapon, it is a strategy, it is a subtle, yet deeply damaging form of manipulation designed to shift responsibility away from the one causing harm and onto the one trying to keep the connection alive. At first, it doesn't seem obvious. A small disagreement arises, and instead of mutual reflection, the finger points at you. You're the one who started it. You never listen? If you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have reacted like this. And over time, you notice a pattern. Every argument ends with you apologizing. Even when you were the one who was hurt. Even when you were the one asking for clarity, kindness, or change. This repeated blame creates a distortion of reality. You begin to think that maybe you are the problem. That maybe if you were calmer, more loving, more careful, things wouldn't get so tense. You start policing yourself, your tone, your words, your needs, so as not to provoke another round of guilt tripping. And slowly, you lose your voice in the relationship. You lose your confidence. You start to believe the narrative that everything going wrong must somehow be your fault. What's even more dangerous is that the one who constantly blames rarely reflects. Blame and self-awareness do not coexist. A man who is quick to blame is often the last to introspect. Instead of meeting you with vulnerability and honesty, he uses projection. Rather than say, I felt insecure, he says, you made me act this way. Rather than admit, I was wrong, he insists, you pushed me to this. In this way, he never has to face himself, because you are always the mirror absorbing the damage. Blame is also a form of control. If he can convince you that your emotions are unstable, your reactions are unreasonable, and your efforts are insufficient, then he gets to remain in the position of moral superiority. He becomes the reasonable one, while you become the one who needs fixing, adjusting, changing. He gets to define the rules. You just get to chase his approval. But love is not a courtroom. A relationship is not a trial where one person is constantly on defense. True partnership requires shared accountability. Both people must be willing to look inward, to own their shadows, and to grow together. When a man refuses to take responsibility for his words and actions, he is not protecting the relationship, he is protecting his pride, and relationships do not grow in the soil of ego. In this kind of blame-filled dynamic, the emotional damage runs deep. You may find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do, suppressing feelings to avoid confrontation, or staying silent just to keep the peace. But silence doesn't heal anything. It only deepens your invisibility. And living in constant fear of being blamed makes love feel like walking through a minefield, where one wrong step can trigger emotional punishment. Eventually, you may start to lose not just faith in the relationship, but in yourself. That is the most dangerous outcome of habitual blame. It doesn't just erode the connection, it erodes your identity. You forget who you were before the blame began. You forget that you once had clarity, strength, and a voice that didn't shake when you spoke. And that's how blame wins, not by being loud, but by being consistent. Not by being violent, but by being constant. It shapes your reality until you're no longer sure what's true. But know this: if you are always the one being blamed, always the one apologizing, always the one carrying the emotional weight for two, it's not because you are broken. It's because someone else refuses to be whole. And no matter how much you love, no matter how hard you try, you cannot heal a dynamic built on blame by being more blameless. You heal it by stepping out of the cycle entirely. By reclaiming your truth, your worth, and your right to a love that does not require you to carry the burden of someone else's emotional immaturity. So, listen not just with your ears, but with the wisdom of your spirit. A man's words are not isolated syllables. They are signposts pointing directly to who he is and what kind of future he is offering you. When his language begins to chip away at your dignity, question your reality, or control your freedom, it is not your task to endure. It is your calling to walk away with grace. Leaving is not failure. It is clarity. It is strength. It is the most powerful affirmation that your peace, your voice, and your emotional safety are not negotiable. Do not wait for louder storms to validate the quiet discomfort you already feel. The truth is always there, softly speaking through the way he speaks to you. You are not here to shrink for someone else's comfort. You are here to expand in truth, to grow in love, and to rise in self-respect. If his words do not align with that path, then let him go. Not with bitterness, but with the calm knowing that you chose yourself, your healing, and your wholeness, and there is no greater love than that.